What a woman experiences when you step out of her world rarely surfaces in any obvious way the moment you walk out the door. There is no announcement. There is no dramatic signal that makes her inner reality easy to interpret. It begins somewhere quieter, somewhere deeper, because the strongest impression you leave on her is not always shaped by what you say while you are standing in front of her. Sometimes it is shaped by what your absence compels her to hear inside herself once you are no longer there. Most men operate under a simple assumption about attraction. They believe it lives in closeness, in sustained attention, in being consistently present and constantly reassuring. They reason that if a woman is drawn to them, the solution is more contact, more words, more reminders that they exist. But emotional reality rarely follows that logic. What she feels for you often becomes most legible in the precise moment your energy is no longer available to anchor her mood, fill her mind, or soften the noise inside her. Being present can make her feel good. Being absent makes her find out why. When you are around, she can enjoy the experience of you without ever truly examining it. She can lean into the warmth, the attentiveness, the sensation of being understood, and move through all of it without once asking herself what function you actually serve in her emotional world. Your presence becomes something she absorbs without analyzing. It becomes comfortable, ordinary, easy to take in. But the moment you leave, something shifts at the level of atmosphere. Her thoughts lose their reference point. The emotional environment changes, and that is when the real internal process begins. Not because she becomes fragile in your absence, not because she loses her footing, but because silence accomplishes something that closeness never can. It removes the steady current of emotional input she had quietly grown accustomed to receiving from you. Your voice, your timing, the patience you carried without performing it. The steadiness that made certain things in her feel organized and safe and wanted. The way you picked up on things before she put them into words. When that disappears, she does not simply register that a person is gone. She registers that what your presence was doing to her nervous system is gone. And that is the part most men never understand. They read her composed exterior as emotional neutrality. They assume that because she is not visibly unraveling, nothing significant is happening beneath the surface. So they panic. They reappear before the silence has had time to do anything. They rush back in with explanations or humor or casual check-ins, trying to extract a reaction before her feelings have even had the chance to form. And in doing so, they unknowingly disrupt the very mechanism that would have revealed how much they mattered. Emotion requires contrast to become visible. A woman cannot fully measure your significance while she is still continuously receiving you. When something is always available, it gets absorbed as background. It becomes part of the scenery even when it carries real weight. But remove it and the outline becomes sharp. Suddenly, she can feel the difference between when you are present and when you are not. Suddenly, the shape of her day changes. The pauses grow louder. Small moments become heavier. Things she never consciously named begin pressing against her from somewhere inside she rarely visits. And at first, that pressure is so faint she might not acknowledge it even to herself. It looks like restlessness without a source. Picking up her phone without thinking. Feeling slightly off and attributing it to tiredness. Replaying a conversation for no clear reason. Hearing something that catches the particular frequency of your voice. Walking into a moment that should feel perfectly ordinary and sensing that something is missing from it. Not missing in any theatrical sense, missing in the way that quietly disturbs a rhythm she had not realized she was depending on. Rhythm matters more than most people give it credit for. A woman does not bond to a man primarily through singular events. She bonds through patterns, through emotional consistency, through repeated experiences that teach her body what to expect when you are near. If your presence has been grounding, attentive, sharp, playful, or emotionally coherent, Her system begins to register you as part of the structure of her inner life. Not the whole of it, but a meaningful part. So when you disappear from that structure, even temporarily, the space you leave behind does not remain empty. It begins producing questions. Why does everything feel different now? Why did his presence affect me more than I understood while he was here? Why do I keep noticing him in places where he is nowhere near? That is when memory begins its work. And memory is not a neutral archive. When you are present, she experiences you in real time, flaws and all. Real-time perception is practical. It is run through mood and stress and distraction and ego and whatever is happening in her life that particular day. But once you are absent, the mind stops processing your imperfections in the moment and begins reconstructing you through emotional significance. It starts curating. It selects certain expressions, certain silences. The look you gave her when she was trying to hold something back. The way you made this order feel slower just by being nearby. The way your energy did not need to force itself to be felt. The way she noticed herself relaxing more around you than she had planned to. And those moments hit differently once you're gone. Because when access is reduced, memory stops functioning like storage and starts functioning like amplification. What registered as casual in real time can begin to feel deeply intimate in retrospect. What she skimmed past without much reaction can return carrying emotional weight. A conversation she barely responded to in the moment now lands with meaning. A time when you held back instead of leaning forward begins to look more powerful than she appreciated. A small habit of yours becomes strangely difficult to find anywhere else. This is where the shift begins to threaten her composure. Because your absence does not simply make her remember you, it makes her compare. She begins measuring the emotional texture of being near you against the emotional texture of everything else around her. The people who talk endlessly but leave no real impression. The attention that is simple to obtain but makes no lasting mark. The conversations that entertain but never actually settle her. The men who pursue and perform and try very hard and still somehow fail to produce the same depth of feeling that your quieter presence created, almost without effort. She may not say any of this aloud. She may not even admit it fully to herself. But the contrast builds regardless, and contrast is ruthless. It has the power to make what seemed ordinary reveal itself as rare. It can make her understand that what felt easy between you was not actually common. It was the result of something specific. A particular quality of masculine presence that she only notices once she no longer has immediate access to it. The things she glossed over now become costly in her mind. Your patience, your emotional steadiness, your willingness to not over-explain yourself, your capacity to make her feel both safe and slightly exposed at the same time. Those qualities begin rising in perceived value precisely because they are no longer being delivered on demand. At this point, her ego steps in to try to protect her. Because when a woman begins genuinely feeling the weight of your absence, she does not usually move directly toward that truth. First, she often tries to minimize it, rationalize it, explain it away. She tells herself it is just an adjustment to a change in routine, that it is not really about you, only about disruption. She may throw herself harder into distraction, become busier, more social, louder in her life, more available to noise and stimulation. Because if she slows down enough, she risks discovering that what she is feeling is not inconvenience. It is something emotional. An emotional truth becomes dangerous when it threatens pride. If she had settled into the comfort of believing you would always be accessible, your absence can feel like an insult to that assumption. Not because she believed she owned you, but because certainty produces carelessness. When your energy is reliably present, it becomes easy to assume that access is permanent, that you will reach out, that your attention can be restarted whenever she decides she wants to feel it again. The mind grows arrogant around things it does not believe it can lose. And nothing dismantles that arrogance more efficiently than distance. Now she has to encounter you in a completely different form, not as a constant, as something missing. And that changes everything because mystery begins filling the space where certainty used to live. She wonders what you are thinking, where your attention has gone, whether you still carry what she felt between you, whether you are moving forward without her, whether you are entirely unaffected, whether another woman is now receiving the version of you she had grown accustomed to having access to. And uncertainty, when it enters real emotional attachment, does not diminish feeling. It amplifies it. It stretches it. It compels her to revisit things she believed were already settled. This is why absence can carry more charge than presence. Presence gives her the experience. Absence forces her to interpret it. And interpretation is where emotions deepen, because she is no longer simply living the connection. She is trying to measure its weight. In that process, she begins to notice something she did not anticipate. What she misses is not always the most obvious thing. It may not just be your face or your messages or your attention. Sometimes what she misses is the version of herself that existed inside your presence. The one who was more honest, more feminine, more playful, more relaxed, more emotionally awake when you were near. Some men make women feel observed. Some make women feel pursued. Very few make a woman feel both calmer and more fully alive at the same time. If you were one of those men, your absence does not only remove a person from her life, it removes an experience of herself that she cannot easily recreate anywhere else. And that is when the missing becomes personal. Because she is no longer only asking where you went. She is asking why she feels less connected to herself. Now that your presence is no longer touching her life in the same way, that question goes deeper than simple attraction. It reaches attachment. It reaches emotional imprint. It reaches the uncomfortable recognition that someone she thought she had fully understood has become more significant in his absence than he ever appeared to be in constant access. But the intensity does not stop there. The longer you remain unavailable, the more her mind is forced to engage with what is unresolved. Not because time automatically generates meaning. Time does not manufacture value from nothing. It reveals value that familiarity had been concealing. If there was nothing genuinely meaningful between you, distance clears it quickly. But if there was real emotional substance, time does not erase it. Time deepens it. It gives memory room to breathe. It gives contrast room to work. It gives her imagination room to fill in what certainty once made unnecessary. And imagination, once connected to uncertainty, can be relentless. She begins completing gaps you never explained, wondering what you felt but chose not to say, wondering how much you noticed that she believed she had hidden, wondering whether your distance is restraint or finality, wondering whether she underestimated the depth of your standards because you carried yourself too calmly for your silence to be mistaken for passivity. This is a place where men consistently misread their own power. They believe that being less available makes them appear cold, disengaged, or irrelevant. But when your absence is rooted in self-possession rather than insecurity, it does something entirely different. It repositions you in her mind. You stop feeling like a resource she can access without thought and start feeling like a reality she may have misjudged. And once a woman senses she may have misjudged you, her attention returns with a different quality. She studies what she previously skimmed. Your restraint begins looking stronger than reaction would have. Your distance begins looking more significant than pursuit ever could. Your silence begins carrying more weight than the words of men who are always talking. Because emotionally, what cannot be casually consumed becomes more psychologically vivid. Not because scarcity works like magic, but because availability changes how something is processed. What is always within reach gets handled one way. What is emotionally significant but no longer guaranteed gets handled another way entirely. It becomes charged. It becomes alive in her mind at unexpected hours, in unexpected moods, in the middle of moments that have nothing to do with you. That is not coincidence. That is unresolved emotional relevance. And the more emotionally relevant you become in your absence, the more other experiences begin revealing their own shallowness. Someone else may offer her attention, but it does not regulate her the same way yours did. Someone else may bring excitement, but it leaves her overstimulated rather than grounded. Someone else may say exactly the right things, but it sounds rehearsed. Someone else may be endlessly available, but feels lightweight in comparison. And suddenly she is sitting with a difficult psychological reality. She may only have understood your weight after the space where you stood went empty. That is not a simple realization to carry, because once she sees the difference, she cannot unsee it. Once emotional contrast becomes conscious, everything flatter than what you offered begins to irritate her in ways she cannot fully explain to anyone else. Then another shift occurs. Your absence stops feeling temporary. As long as some part of her believed you were still emotionally reachable, she could comfort herself with possibility. She could imagine that whenever she chose to, she could reopen the loop, restore contact, draw your energy back into range. But when she begins sensing that your attention is no longer parked where she left it, that you are no longer emotionally stationed in the same place, the internal pressure changes. The issue is no longer simply that she misses you. It is that she is losing access to what missing you has been teaching her about herself. That creates conflict. Part of her wants to protect her pride. Part of her wants to reach out. Part of her resents feeling disaffected. Part of her has begun respecting your distance in a way she never once respected your availability. And all of those impulses can exist simultaneously. That is what makes absence so psychologically layered. It does not produce one clean emotion. It produces a stack of them. Desire tangled with hesitation. Curiosity knotted with ego. Regret woven through attraction. Longing pressed up against the fear of being seen. She is fighting two battles at once, the one where she misses your energy and the one where she resists what that missing reveals about how deeply you got through. By this point, your value is no longer based on anything you have said about yourself. It is being measured by what your absence is doing to her internal world. That is real power, not loud power, not the kind that performs or manipulates or chases recognition. Quiet power. The kind that needs no announcement because it is already unfolding inside her when you are nowhere near her. And if you hold your composure, that effect only deepens. Because the moment you rush back in to release the tension, you rescue her from the full encounter with your own significance, you become available again before the lesson has finished completing itself. But when you remain grounded, when you allow space to accomplish what over-explanation never could, something else begins to happen. She starts revising the story she had told herself about you. Not because you argued her into seeing things differently, because your absence kept generating evidence she could actually feel. She begins understanding that your energy was never cheap, that your steadiness was not automatic, that your attention was not a basic utility available on demand, that your warmth was not an unlimited resource, that your emotional availability was not something she could count on indefinitely without it ever meaning anything. These realizations do not tend to arrive in one dramatic moment. They accumulate slowly. A little more in the quiet of evening, a little more after disappointment elsewhere, a little more after superficial interactions that leave nothing behind. A little more each time she recognizes that what you gave her cannot be reproduced simply by substituting someone else into the same position. Over time, what began as a faint disturbance in her rhythm can become a full internal reckoning. That reckoning is not always visible from the outside. She may still appear composed. She may move through her days with apparent ease, but internally, the shape of your absence keeps transforming. First, it was a gap, then a question, then a comparison, then a mirror. Then it becomes something closer to a verdict. You mattered more than she allowed herself to recognize when you were easy to reach. And that verdict carries weight not only because of what it says about you, it carries weight because of what it says about her own perception. It forces her to acknowledge that access made her careless, that comfort lowered her attentiveness, that certainty caused her to handle something lightly that deserved more care. When that lands, the emotional tone changes again. What she feels is no longer just curiosity or longing. It is the ache of clarity that arrived too late. There is a particular kind of pain in understanding the value of something only after the conditions that made you casual about it have already changed. Because now she cannot simply enjoy what you were. She has to feel what your absence means. She has to sit with the difference between having your energy nearby and remembering it from a distance. That contradiction can stay with a woman far longer than men tend to imagine, especially when she senses that you are not standing still. If she begins to feel that you are moving forward, that your life is no longer circling her awareness, that you have returned fully to your own center, the effect intensifies. Because then your absence is no longer a pause. It becomes a direction. It becomes evidence that your presence in her life was a choice you made, not a need you had. And nothing shifts perception faster than recognizing that the person whose energy you could feel at any moment no longer requires you in order to feel complete. That is when respect and longing can converge. Not childish longing, not fantasy, something more unsettling than either of those. The recognition that the man she had grown familiar with is becoming unreachable, not because he is punishing her, but because he has reorganized himself around his own worth. That lands differently. It makes her feel your absence as consequence rather than accident, as standard rather than mood, as self-respect rather than strategy. And once your absence is understood that way, your image in her mind changes permanently. You are no longer simply the man who was there. You are the man whose absence revealed what his presence actually was. That is the final shift, the deepest one, because by then she is not only feeling the loss of contact, she is feeling the loss of access to a rare emotional environment. A man who made her feel seen without chasing her, desired without consuming her, safe without becoming soft, challenged without becoming chaotic, familiar without becoming dull. Once that particular combination disappears, the mind does not easily replace it. It circles around it. It returns to it. It measures new experiences against it. And often, without any intention to, keeps discovering that what it lost had a structure, a gravity, a psychological effect on her that only became undeniable once it was gone. This is why absence, when it comes from a place of dignity, should never be mistaken for weakness. Space is not empty. Space reveals. It reveals who was merely entertaining and who was actually regulating, who was replaceable and who was leaving a genuine imprint, who was noise and who was atmosphere. If your presence carried real weight, your absence will not go unnoticed. It will move through her in stages, quietly at first, then personally, then in ways she was not prepared for. But the most important thing is not what she eventually feels, it is what you understand going into it. You do not reduce your presence to cause suffering. You do not withdraw to play perceptual games. You do not disappear to engineer an emotional outcome. That is a small way to operate. What matters is understanding that your value does not become real because you articulate it convincingly. It becomes real because your absence can expose what your constant availability was preventing everyone from seeing clearly. A man who genuinely respects himself does not plead to be recognized. He allows reality to teach what his words no longer need to explain. And if she finally feels the full gravity of who you are only once you are no longer around, that is not revenge. That is consequence. It is what happens when a woman only truly understands a presence once she has to live without it. The calm, the tension, the grounding, the mystery, the emotional shelter, the particular way you occupied space in her mind without ever trying to. All of it rises once you leave, because silence gives truth the room it needs to breathe. By the time that truth becomes something she can no longer deny, the most powerful part of the whole thing will be this. You are no longer waiting for it. You are no longer standing at the edge of her awareness, hoping she finally sees it. You are no longer offering unlimited access so she can slowly learn your worth while your peace quietly pays for it. You have already turned back toward yourself, already reclaimed your own attention, already decided that your presence is not something to be made permanently available to people who only understand it in hindsight. And that is what gives your absence its final and truest weight. Not that she misses you, not that she wonders, not even that she realizes what she had, but that the man she is only now beginning to fully understand is no longer available to be underestimated.